The title of this book, The Spiritual Man. We are in great part 5 of this book, chapter 3 of this great part 5. The title of chapter 3, Conscience. Chapter 3, subpart 5. Chapter 3 of this great part 5 of this book, subpart 5. After one has permitted conscience to begin operating, he should allow it to perfect its work. Sins must be treated progressively one by one until all have been eliminated. If a child of God is faithful in his dealing with sin and faithfully follow his conscience, he shall receive light increasingly from heaven and have his unnoticed sins exposed. The Holy Spirit shall enable him to read and to understand more of the law written upon his heart. Thus is he made to know what is holiness, righteousness, purity, and honesty, concerning which he had had only vague idea before. Moreover, his intuition is strengthened greatly in its ability to know the mind of the Holy Spirit. Whenever a believer is therefore reproved by his conscience, his immediate response should be, Lord, I am willing to obey. He should let Christ once again be the law of his life. He should be teachable and should be taught by the Holy Spirit. The Spirit shall surely come and help if the person is honesty, minding his conscience. Conscience is like a window to the believer's spirit. Through it, the ray of heaven shines into the spirit, flooding the whole being with light. Heavenly light shines in through the conscience to expose fault and to condemn failure whenever we wrongfully think or speak or act in a way not becoming sin. If by submitting to its voice and eliminating the sin it condemns, we allow it to do its work, then the light from heaven will shine brighter next time. But should we not confess nor extirpate the sin, our conscience will be corrupted by it in God Titus chapter 1 verse 15. Because we have not walked according to the teaching of God's light. With sin accumulating, conscience as a widow become increasingly clouded. Light can be thoroughly penetrate the spirit, and there finally come a day when that believer can sin without compunction and with not grief at all. Since the conscience has long been paralyzed and the intuition dwelled by sin, the more spiritual a believer is, the more keenly alert is his inner monitor. No Christian can be so spiritual as to have no further necessity to confess his sin. He must be fallen spiritually if his conscience is dull and insensitive. Excellent knowledge, hard labor, excited feeling, and strong will cannot substitute for a sensitive conscience. He who does not heed it, but seek mental and sensational progress, is retrogressing spiritually. The sensitivity of the conscience can be increased as well as decreased. Should anyone give ground to his conscience to operate, his spirit's window will let the more light next time. But should he disregard it or answer it with reason or work other than what it demands, then his conscience will speak more and more softly each time. Each time it is rejected until ultimately it ceases to speak. But should he disregard it or answer it with reason or work other than what it demands, then his conscience will speak more and more softly each time it is rejected until ultimately it ceases to speak. Every time a believer does not listen to conscience, he damages his spiritual work. If this self-inflicted wounding of his spiritual life continue unabated, he shall sink into the state of being fleshly. He will lose all his former distaste for sin and former admiration of victory, until we learn to face squarely the reproach which arise from conscience. We do not actually appreciate how meaningful to our walk in the Spirit this hidden of the voice of conscience is. We do not actually appreciate how meaningful to our walk in the Spirit this hidden of the voice of conscience is. A good conscience. A good conscience. I have lived before God in all good conscience up to this day. In Acts chapter 23 verse 1. This is the secret of Paul's life. The conscience he refers to is not that of an unregenerated person, but of a Holy Spirit-filled conscience. Bold in approaching God and perfect in his communion with him, the apostles' regenerated conscience give him no reproach. He does everything according to it. Never does he do anything that his conscience objects to. Nor does he ever permit one item to remain in his life which is condemned. He is therefore bold before God and man. We lose our confidence when our conscience is murky. The apostle always took pain to have a clear conscience toward God and toward men. Acts chapter 24 verse 16. For if our heart do not condemn us, we have confidence before God, and we receive from him whatever we ask, because we keep his commandment and do what please him. 1 John chapter 3 verse 21 to 22. Believers simply do not realize how very significant their conscience is. Many have the idea that as long as they walk after the Spirit, all is well. They do not know that an unclear conscience means loss of confidence in approaching God, and that this loss in turn means description of one's communion with him. In fact, a muddled conscience can hinder our intuitive communion with God more than anything else. If we fail to keep his commandment and to do what pleases him, our monitor within shall naturally reprove us, rendering us fearful before God, and hence keeping us from receiving what we seek. We can serve God only with a clear conscience. In 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 3. An opaque one shall surely cause us to shrink back intuitively from God. Our boast is this: the testimony of our conscience that we have behaved in the world and still more toward you with holiness and godly sincerity, not by earthly wisdom, but by the grace of God. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 12. This passage speaks of the testimony of conscience. Only a conscience without offense will testify for a believer. It is good to have the testimony of others, but how much better to have the testimony of our own conscience. The apostle has said that this is what he is boasting of here. In one walk after the Spirit, we need to have this testimony continually. What other people say is subject to error because they cannot fully know how God has guided us. Perhaps they may misunderstand and misjudge us just as the apostles were misunderstood and misjudged by the believer in their day. At times, they also may overpraise and over-admire us. Many times, men criticize us when we actually are following the law. On other occasions, they praise us for what they see in us. Third, it is largely the result of a temporarily emotional outburst or a cleverly conceived thought on our part. Hence, outside praise or criticism is inconsequential. But the testimony of our quickened conscience is momentous. We should pay extreme attention to how it bears us witness. What is its estimate of us? Does it condemn us as hypocritical, or does it testify that we have walked amongst men in holiness and godly sincerity? Does conscience affirm that we already have walked according to all the light we have? What is the testimony of Paul's conscience? It testifies that he has behaved in the world, not by earthly wisdom, but by the grace of God. Conscience is fact. Conscience, in fact, can testify to nothing else. What it contains for and insist upon in the believer is solely for that life to be lived by the grace of God and not by earthly wisdom. Earthly wisdom is totally nil. Is totally nil in God's will and work. It equally amounts to nothing in a believer's spiritual life. Man's mind is altogether useless in his communion with God, even in his communication with material world. The mind occupies but a subordinate position. A child of God lives on earth exclusively by the grace of God, and grace implies something entirely done by Him, with men having no part in it, in Romans chapter 11, verse 6. Except as one lives exclusively by God, not permitting himself to take any initiative, nor allowing his mind to have control over him, can conscience testify that he lives in the world in holiness and godly sincerity. In other words, it operates together with intuition. Conscience bears witness to everything done according to revelation in intuition, but it resists every action which is contrary to intuition, no matter how compatible it is with human wisdom. To sum up, conscience approves only the revelation of intuition. Intuition leads believer, while conscience constrains them to follow their intuition. A good conscience, which attests God's good pleasure in the believer, since there is nothing between him and God, is absolutely essential to a life walk after the Spirit.